Every woman has done it. Kissed a man on the lips, on the cheek, maybe even somewhere more daring, and still felt like something was missing. Like she touched his skin, but never actually touched him. That gap, that quiet distance you sometimes feel even in the middle of a kiss, isn't random, it's psychological. Because the truth is, physical affection only creates real connection when it lands in the places the mind associates with safety, trust, and emotional exposure, not just the places that are physically obvious. Most women are taught through movies and magazines that passion lives only on the mouth. But psychologists who study touch, attachment, and nonverbal intimacy will tell you something very different. The body has quiet zones, places most people never think to kiss, that unlock a level of emotional response most couples never even discover. These places don't just feel good. They tell the nervous system you are safe here, and that message is more powerful than any grand romantic gesture. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through three of these places, not for shock value, but because understanding them could completely change the way you connect with the people you love. Some of what you're about to hear might make you rethink kisses you've given 100 times without realizing what they were actually doing to the other person's mind. Stay with me, because the first one might surprise you the most. Before we get into the first place, I want you to think about a moment. Maybe you don't even remember it consciously. When someone touched your forehead gently or ran their fingers along the back of your neck without saying a word. Did you notice how your body responded before your mind even caught up? That reaction isn't an accident. It's wired into us. And here's the strange part. There's one place on the human body that, according to attachment researchers, does more to lower psychological defenses than almost any other kind of touch. And it's not where you think. Most people skip it completely because it doesn't feel romantic in the traditional sense. It feels intimate in a different way, quieter, deeper, almost parental in its softness. I'll tell you exactly where it is and why it works in just a moment. But first, I need you to understand something about how the brain processes touch. Because without that context, none of this will make sense. And once you understand it, you'll never look at physical affection the same way again. Human beings are, at our core, touch-starved creatures pretending we're not. We live in a culture that praises independence, that tells us we should be able to self-soothe, self-regulate, handle everything on our own. But underneath all of that conditioning is a nervous system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to crave co-regulation. The calming, grounding effect that happens when another person touches us in a way that says, I see you, and you don't have to protect yourself right now. This is why a hug from the right person can make you feel instantly lighter, while a hug from someone you don't fully trust can feel stiff, awkward, even suffocating. Touch isn't just touch, it's a message, and the brain is constantly decoding that message, whether we're aware of it or not. Psychologists call this affective touch, and it's processed in a completely different part of the brain than ordinary physical sensation. It doesn't just register as someone touched me. It registers as someone chose to be gentle with me. And that distinction changes everything about how safe, how wanted, and how emotionally secure a person feels in that moment. This is exactly why some kisses feel like nothing. A formality, a habit, something you do because it's expected, while others leave a person thinking about it for days. The difference almost never comes down to technique. It comes down to where the kiss lands and what that specific location has come to represent in the emotional architecture of the human mind. So let's talk about the first place, the one that quietly does more work than almost any other gesture in a relationship, the forehead. A kiss on the forehead doesn't ask for anything. That's the first thing to understand about why it's so powerful. Every other kind of kiss, the mouth, the neck, the collarbone, carries at least a small undertone of desire, of wanting something in return. But the forehead is different. It's protective. It's the kind of kiss a parent gives a child when they're scared. The kind of kiss that says, I'm not here because I want something from you. I'm here because I care about you existing. And that distinction matters more than people realize because in adult relationships, so much of what we do is transactional, even affection. We hug because we're greeted. We kiss because it's expected before someone leaves. But a forehead kiss interrupts that pattern entirely. It signals safety without an agenda, and that combination, physical closeness with zero expectation, is something the nervous system responds to almost instantly. People often describe feeling an unexpected wave of emotion when someone kisses their forehead, especially during a hard time. And that's not sentimentality, that's biology. It mimics the earliest experiences of comfort most of us ever had, the ones from childhood, before we learned to be guarded, before we learned that closeness could be complicated. When an adult receives a forehead kiss from someone they trust, some part of their mind quietly returns to that early feeling of someone is looking out for me. That's why men, even the ones who seem emotionally unavailable, even the ones who rarely talk about their feelings, often go quiet and soft after a forehead kiss. It disarms them in a way words never could because it doesn't ask them to perform or respond. It simply lets them exist, held for a few seconds, without needing to do anything at all. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. Men rarely ask for this. Not because they don't want it, but because asking for something that feels this vulnerable, this tender, feels almost embarrassing to admit out loud. Society has spent decades training men to associate emotional need with weakness. So even when a man craves that specific kind of gentle, undemanding affection, he often doesn't have the language or the permission he's given himself to say so. Instead, he might just lean his head down slightly when you're close, or go quiet in a way that seems like nothing, but is actually an invitation. Most women miss it completely, not because they're not attentive, but because they've never been taught to look for it. And that's the pattern we're going to keep coming back to throughout this video. The places that matter most are rarely announced. They're implied quietly through body language that most people are never taught to read. Now, here's where I want you to hold on to something because the second place we're going to talk about works almost in reverse of the forehead, psychologically speaking. If the forehead is about safety without agenda, the second place is about vulnerability with agenda. A small, quiet risk that, when honored gently, builds trust faster than almost anything else. And once I tell you what it is, you're going to start noticing it everywhere. In how people angle their bodies, in the moments they go still, in the subtle ways they invite closeness without ever using words. Stay with me because this next one changes the emotional temperature of a relationship faster than people expect. The second place is the neck, specifically the side and back of the neck, not as an act of passion, but as an act of trust. Think about this for a second. The neck is one of the most physically vulnerable parts of the human body. Evolutionarily, it's where predators strike. It's where we carry our pulse, our breath, our most immediate signs of life. Which means that when someone allows another person close to their neck, really close, in a slow, unhurried way, they are on a very old, very primal level, communicating trust. This is why the neck has always carried such heightened emotional and even sexual significance across cultures and throughout history. It's not arbitrary. It's not something a magazine invented to sell articles. It's built into how humans have always signaled safety to one another. A kiss on the neck, when it's slow, when it's not rushed towards something else, when it lingers with intention rather than urgency, sends an incredibly specific message to the nervous system. I could hurt you here, and I choose not to. I choose gentleness instead. That message, decoded almost instantly by the subconscious mind, creates a rush of oxytocin, the same hormone released during childbirth, breastfeeding, and deep emotional bonding, which is why neck kisses so often trigger a physical reaction people can't fully explain. A shiver, a held breath, a sudden softening in posture. That's not just physical arousal, though it can include that. It's the nervous system registering safety in one of its most exposed states. Here's what most people don't realize, though. Men crave this kind of touch far more than they let on, but they almost never ask for it directly, because doing so would mean admitting a level of vulnerability that contradicts the tough, self sufficient image many men have been taught to project since childhood. So instead, you'll see it in smallest signs: a slight tilt of the head when you're close, a longer exhale when your hand brushes near their neck, a stillness that almost feels like they're holding their breath, waiting to see what you'll do. Many women interpret this stillness as disinterest, when in psychological terms, it's often the opposite. It's a nervous system bracing itself for something it desperately wants, but has never learned how to ask for out loud. And this is where the emotional intelligence of a partner really matters. Because responding to that stillness with patience, with slowness, with intention, rather than rushing past it towards something more overtly sexual, is often what separates a fleeting physical moment from one that creates real, lasting emotional bonding. I want you to pause here and think about your own relationships, past or present. Have you ever noticed someone go unusually quiet, unusually still when you got close to their neck? Did you read that as hesitation, or did you understand it as an invitation? Because so much of intimacy isn't about doing more, it's about noticing more, about slowing down enough to actually read what the body is communicating instead of rushing past it toward the next thing. This is a pattern we're going to see again with the third and final place. And honestly, out of everything in this video, this last one might be the most overlooked of all. Not because it's obscure, but because it's hiding in plain sight, in a place people touch constantly without ever realizing what it actually communicates. Before we get to it, though, I want to talk for a moment about why so many people, especially men, struggle to ask for the kind of touch that actually makes them feel loved. Because understanding this is what makes everything else in this video make sense. From a very young age, boys are taught, sometimes directly, sometimes through subtle social conditioning, that emotional need is something to be managed privately, not expressed openly. A boy who cries too easily is told to toughen up. A boy who seeks physical comfort past a certain age is gently, or not so gently, redirected toward independence. By the time that boy becomes a man, he's often spent 2, sometimes 3 decades training himself out of asking for the exact kind of tenderness his nervous system still, biologically, deeply craves. This doesn't mean men don't want gentle, intentional touch. It means they've learned to want it silently, to hope for it without asking, to feel enormous relief when someone gives it to them without being told to, because that relief comes with something else attached to it. The sense of being truly seen without having had to ask, without having had to risk the vulnerability of asking and possibly being met with confusion or rejection. This is why the 3 places in this video matter so much. They're not really about physical technique at all. They're about learning to notice what a person can't say and responding to it anyway. Now, the 3rd place, this one is different from the first 2 because it doesn't involve the face or the neck at all. It's the hands, specifically the palms and the inside of the wrist. At first, this might sound almost too simple to matter, but stay with me because the psychology behind it runs deeper than almost anyone expects. The hands are, in many ways, the most expressive and most neglected part of the human body when it comes to intimacy. We use our hands constantly to work, to gesture, to hold, to reach, but we almost never think of them as an emotional landscape, a place where trust and vulnerability live just as much as they do anywhere else. And yet, think about how much of human connection actually happens through the hands. Holding hands during a hard conversation, squeezing someone's hand in a hospital waiting room, interlacing fingers during a movie without either person saying a word about it. The hands are constantly communicating emotional state, and the palm in particular, soft, sensitive, rarely touched with real intention by anyone outside of a medical or professional context, becomes an incredibly powerful place for connection, precisely because it's so rarely honored that way. When someone kisses the inside of another person's palm or slowly traces their lips along the inside of a wrist, it does something psychologically distinct from a kiss anywhere else on the body. It makes the other person feel chosen in a way that feels almost ceremonial. There's a reason wedding vows are often accompanied by hand holding, why proposals often involve taking someone's hand first, why comforting someone in grief often starts with simply holding their hand before any words are exchanged. The hands represent agency, action, the way a person moves through the world, and when someone slows down enough to treat that same hand with tenderness instead of urgency, it sends an unmistakable message. I don't just want your body, I want you, all of you, even the quiet, unremarkable parts of you that no one else pays attention to. Men, in particular, often respond to this kind of touch with an intensity that surprises even them because it's rarely something they've experienced before in this specific intentional way. It doesn't trigger performance or pressure the way other kinds of physical intimacy sometimes can. It simply feels like being cherished. And for a lot of men, being cherished without having to earn it, without having to perform strength or competence first, is one of the rarest emotional experiences they'll ever have. If you think back over the three places we've covered, the forehead, the neck, and the hands, you'll notice a pattern that ties them all together. And honestly, this pattern is the real point of this entire video. None of these places are inherently sexual. None of them require anything overtly dramatic or performative. What they have in common is that they all bypass the usual scripts of romance and go straight to something more primal: safety, trust, and being seen without having to ask. And that's really what most people, men included, are quietly craving in their relationships, even if they never phrase it that way out loud. Not more excitement, not more grand gestures, just more moments where someone slows down enough to notice them, to touch them with intention instead of habit, to make them feel like a person worth being gentle with, rather than a body to move quickly past on the way to something else. This is also why so many relationships, even ones that look happy from the outside, quietly struggle with a sense of emotional distance that neither partner can fully explain. It's rarely because love is missing. It's because the specific quiet language of trust-building touch has never been learned or offered. Passion, in the traditional sense, is loud. It's easy to perform, easy to fake, easy to mistake for connection because it produces an immediate physical response. But the kind of touch we've been talking about throughout this video, slow, intentional, undemanding, requires something much harder to fake: presence. You cannot rush a forehead kiss and have it land the way it's supposed to. You cannot kiss someone's neck with real trust building intention while thinking about something else. You cannot hold someone's palm to your lips and mean it while you're distracted, checking the time, moving toward the next thing. These places demand that you actually be there, fully, even if only for a few seconds. And that presence is exactly what makes them so powerful and exactly why they're so rare. I also want to address something important here, because I don't want this video to feel like it's suggesting that men are simply passive recipients of affection, waiting silently to be understood. That's not the full picture, and it's not fair to men or to the complexity of real relationships. Men absolutely have agency in expressing what they want and need, and healthy relationships depend on both partners learning to communicate directly, not just relying on subtle cues and quiet interpretation. But what's true, and what psychology consistently shows, is that emotional vulnerability is harder for many men to access verbally than it is for many women, largely due to decades of social conditioning that starts in early childhood. This doesn't excuse a lack of communication in relationships. Direct conversation is always healthier than guesswork, but it does explain why learning to read these subtle physical cues can be an act of deep empathy, a way of meeting someone where they are. rather than only where they're able to fully articulate themselves yet. Over time, as trust grows, as emotional safety builds, most people, men included, become more able to ask directly for what they need. But that growth often starts with someone else noticing first, gently, without judgment, and responding with the kind of touch that says, I see what you can't say yet, and it's okay. There's something else worth mentioning here, something that ties all of this back to a bigger psychological truth about human connection in general. We live in an era of constant stimulation, notifications, content, noise, distraction, and in that environment, slow, intentional touch has become almost rebellious. It stands out precisely because it's so rare. A quick kiss goodbye has become the default in so many relationships, not because people don't care, but because everyone is moving fast, thinking about the next thing, treating physical affection as a checkbox rather than a moment of genuine connection. Which means that when someone does slow down, when they take an extra 2 or 3 seconds to kiss a forehead with real presence, to trace lips along a neck with real attention, to hold a palm to their mouth like it matters, that moment stands out disproportionately, precisely because of how rare real presence has become. This is, in a strange way, good news because it means you don't need grand gestures to create real intimacy. You don't need elaborate plans or expensive gifts or perfectly worded declarations. You need presence, applied to the right places, at the right moments, with real attention rather than habit. I want you to think about the relationships in your own life right now, not just romantic ones, but any relationship where physical affection plays a role. Are you moving through those moments quickly, out of habit, because that's what's expected? Or are you actually present in them, noticing the person in front of you, noticing where they lean in, where they go still, where they seem to soften? Because that noticing is really the skill underneath everything we've talked about today. It's not really about memorizing 3 places on the body. It's about developing the kind of attentiveness that lets you see what someone else can't say out loud and responding to it with patience instead of rushing past it. That skill, once developed, changes far more than just physical intimacy. It changes how you listen when someone talks about a hard day. It changes how you notice when someone goes quiet in a way that isn't really about nothing. It changes the entire emotional texture of your relationships because you start operating from a place of attentiveness rather than assumption. Before we wrap up, I want to bring this back to where we started because I think it matters. At the beginning of this video, I said that most kisses fail to create real connection, not because of technique, but because of location and intention. Now that we've walked through the forehead, the neck, and the hands, I hope that idea feels a lot less abstract. These aren't just sensitive spots in some superficial physical sense. They're psychological doorways, each one tied to a different part of what makes people feel safe, trusted, and truly seen by another person. The forehead offers safety without agenda. The neck offers trust in vulnerability. The hands offer being chosen without having to perform. Together, they form something like a map, not a map of arousal, but a map of emotional safety, one that far too few people ever learn to read, let alone use intentionally in their relationships. And here's the thing I really want you to sit with. None of this requires the other person to say a single word. That's what makes it so powerful, and also what makes it so easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Men in particular are rarely taught how to ask for this kind of quiet, intentional tenderness. So it falls to the people around them, partners, friends, family, to learn how to offer it without waiting to be asked, to notice the small signs, the stillness, the leaning in, the quiet exhale, and respond with presence instead of moving past it. That's not a burden. It's an opportunity. Because the relationships that last, the ones that feel different from all the rest, are almost always built on exactly this kind of quiet attentiveness rather than grand romantic gestures that fade the moment the excitement wears off. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. Intimacy isn't loud. It isn't found in the biggest gestures or the most dramatic declarations. It's found in the small, quiet moments where someone chooses to slow down, to notice, to touch with intention instead of habit. The forehead, just the neck, the hands, These aren't just places on the body. They're invitations, quiet ones, waiting to be noticed by someone patient enough to see them. So now I want to hear from you. Out of the three places we talked about today, which one surprised you the most? Or which one do you think matters most in your own relationships? Let me know in the comments below, because I read every single one and I genuinely love to know which part of this resonated with you the most.